You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Thank you so much. Like I say, I always love it when people bring in an artist to me, and when you suggested like Barbara Kruger, I was glad because I haven't talked about her yet.
Cool.
And I love that you brought in like the "don't be a jerk," like I said. And I appreciate that it wasn't like a passive aggressive thing that like, hey, you're asking me to do something at the last minute.
I didn't even think about it that way, but it's hilarious now that you say it.
That's all I can think about. All I can, like, deep down in my psyche, I am analyzing every interaction for why does this person hate me?
I relate to that so hard. Like, you don't even know.
I feel like who art Ed?
Try to spice it.
Who art it? Mr. Wood art Ed me.
Good. Either way, it's ambiguous. It works on so many levels.
I know.
That's off to a great start.
Welcome to Who Arted, the podcast where we explore visual arts in an audio medium. I'm your host, Kyle Wood, and joining me today is tech guru extraordinaire, Jennifer Lieben. Thanks for joining me.
Hi.
So today we are going to be looking at the artwork of Barbara Kruger, a contemporary artist, born and raised in Newark, New Jersey. She was born in 1945, and she attended Syracuse University for about a year, and then she left school, from what I understand, to like take care of her sick father. Then she went to Parsons School of Design for like a year and a half. She didn't actually like finish her degree, from what I understand. I remember listening to an interview where she said she basically never felt like she fit into that art world and that art scene and the academia. She felt art school. She felt like, there was a little bit of pretentiousness. There was a little bit of class issues. She left school basically to make money to help support herself and her family, because she said she got scholarships, but it wasn't quite cutting the Dijon, so like she needed that little supplement. And she started off doing freelance work, graphic design, photo editing. She worked at magazines, and that would turn out to be a huge influence in her work later on, because she was doing those layouts. Like back in the day, it was literally cutting up like dummy text and stuff and laying out the page, and like she was gluing it down.
All right, Kyle, can I just tell you that I was on my school newspaper, and this is in 1994, 95, and we were still cutting and gluing stuff for the layout, so it wasn't that long ago.
No, but like it is something that like for people today to think about, like you weren't laying it out on the computer. And the other thing that I found really interesting, in prep for this, I was listening to an interview where she was talking to Jesse Thorne, the Bullseye podcast, and she was talking about how the priorities there in the magazine, it was first the page layout, make sure the page layout looks good. And then based on that, they would tell the writers, okay, this is your word count that will fit in this space.
Oh, wow.
So it was like the article was written to fit the space and the aesthetic of the magazine.
I kind of love that.
I kind of love that too. It makes sense though, because the magazine was so much about just like the aesthetics and trying to be a vehicle for selling advertisement.
Yes.
And you want it all to look pretty.
Yeah.
Like I said, she had that art school background, but also the commercial arts background and practical real world experience, getting eyes to pay attention to the messages in the magazines. She did some work in like the 1960s, like 1969. I think she was making work for alternative art spaces in like the New York art scene. And she's always been very politically active. This is 1960s. We're talking,
Think so.
Now I'm going to get mixed up on the years of the different waves.
Yeah, I don't know. Don't test me on that.
But she was definitely very, very much, politically active. And what I find interesting is a lot of her work is political, but it's for the most part raising questions more than like supplying answers.
Yeah, it's not telling you.
It's asking the viewer to think about things it's posing the questions in a way that's kind of leading and making things seem problematic and creating some cognitive dissonance or conflicting thoughts in there. But she's not, for the most part, like beating you over the head with the message. But her earlier works, she was doing a little bit with different media. At that time, a lot of people were sort of reevaluating the crafts that had been so long marginalized. Like I was actually just recently teaching a lesson to my students about quilts and how quilts were abstract art before abstract art was a term, you know? And so she was doing things with yarn and ribbon and, sequins and feathers and other materials that, a lot of feminist artists were trying to sort of reclaim that notion of crafts and elevate it and show it in galleries and say this is worthy of respect. The way that so many terms have been reclaimed by various communities that, take away the power of the derision by embracing it. And so then, for a while she was doing that type of work. From what I understand, she got a little bit tired of doing the paintings and other, traditional media. And she moved to California. She taught at University of California. I believe she still teaches at like UCLA. She feels like that's a part of that artistic practice is, being a part of that community and giving back and guiding students and seeing what new generation is creating, which I fully love that notion, the way she put it. And, she started taking architectural photographs in like the 70s. And then, in the 80s, she started making the collage pieces that we became so familiar with. So, her style, it's typical, like found images. She takes a lot of black and white images, or she turns it to black and white now, and, gives it that old feel. And then she puts in her lovely sans serif fonts and puts in the text to go along with it. I want to sort of now shift to looking at a work of art. You brought up the "Don't Be a Jerk" piece. And I feel like I'm doing so much monologuing, but I want you to feel like you can interrupt any time.
It's all right. I was just enjoying the story.
Because I'm so much the type of person that is like, I just can't have dead space. And, I just always, just so you know, interrupt any time because I don't want to be like standing here. I just don't want to be standing here mansplaining Barbara Kruger to you.
It just hit me. We'll need to do an inspired artwork that just says "Stop mansplaining." It's perfect. But yeah.
What's your preference? Do you want to talk about I believe it's the original from '84, or she was commissioned by MoMA to do it in 1996, and she put those prints.
I don't even think I was aware of the 96 version. 1984 is the one that I have printed out, and I used that. There was a website, and it's an old website now, but it would take a picture and it would like print things out, like posterized for you on like several sheets. And then I like glued them together, and then I like laminated it. So it, because teachers do laminate your posters. And
copyright violation.
So it's kind of funny because like, the poster itself is very inspired, like collage, and I think I loved the sentiment so much, the original 1984 version, because it's just those like crowds and crowds of people. And it was just so like, that's the key, that sentiment, that whole "don't be a jerk" is kind of like at the heart of, I don't know, society and survival. It's sort of like just the modern day rephrasing of the golden rule, like do unto others and everything, but it's just like in this like very obvious, like, boop, there you go.
Yeah. And
keep it in mind,
to break it down, it's a black and white photograph we see of a crowd of people that, today that makes me shudder because they are like, there's no room between anybody. it is a monoculture there.
Yes.
You know, it's an older photograph. It looks like from the little bits you can see of the style of dress, it's a lot of like more formal attire than I would see on the streets today,
I would
or
guess
even
like
50 years ago. Like this would seem overly formal, you know, like, it does look like 40s kind of thing.
I'm looking at like the women's hair and stuff, kind of. Yeah.
The hair, the sort of suit jackets and overcoats, and just like everybody seems, you know, a little bit, you know, more formal than I've seen in my lifetime from a crowd.
It's very Where's Waldo? Like, because everything is so compacted together, there's so many people in it that like you stand back and you see it as one big like texture that's like, oh, it's a crowd. But then if you get close and you look at it, there's like all the little individual people like down in the corner, like, oh, there's a guy with like a little boater hat, and there's like a woman, looks like she's holding a newspaper. So like you don't even notice it at first. So it's interesting. It
is interesting. And as you say, like from a distance, it just becomes a texture. It just like from a distance, it's this black and white. It looks like a crayon rubbing of a concrete wall or something. It's just that like speckly texture.
Ooh,
but then
it's like the composition notebook.
It is like the composition notebook.
It is. If you squint your eyes and you look at it, it totally looks like that.
Yeah. But then it's got this right in the center, this bold shock of red, a red rectangle with a simple, looks like probably Helvetica type of font, like simple sans serif, bright, like bold white, don't be a jerk written.
For today's kids, you would tell them it looks like the Supreme logo. Only it says "Don't be a jerk." You know what I mean? That's their connection. That's what they would know.
Well, it's true. Like it does have that feel of you know, like a Snapchat kind of label across the photo. You know what I mean? It's got that, but this was done long before those things were in existence. I'd say those things were probably more influenced by Barbara Kruger and her style. But it is labeling "Don't be a jerk," and the connection I take to it, obviously, is we're all in this together. You know, your actions will have impacts on others, and you know we want to make sure that message is loud and clear. You know, speaking of loud and proud.
It's funny because I was first drawn to this when I was teaching in the art room, which is going on maybe like 10 years ago or so. And that's when I hung it up in my classroom, and I would always tell people like, this is my classroom rules poster. Like it's simple. When you boil it down, it's simple. But then when I moved to teaching technology, it came to my new classroom. And then this year I'm in an elementary library, and it is hanging up loud and proud in my library space. It has followed me. And it's just funny how it's almost more relevant now than ever. Like we're all in this together.
Yeah. And it's followed her too, because she made this in like 1984 as a screen print, you know, 20 years, no, not 20 years, 12 years later. Math, you know, I got a degree in coloring. Okay.
We're fine.
Got a bachelor's in coloring and my master's in ones and zeros. Gosh. I didn't get to much more. But her in 1996, so 12 years later, she's commissioned by MoMA to make this for a campaign that went on like the back of city buses. And it's this big, like that version has a big eye behind it. And I always think of like those psychological studies about how like if you see an eye, you feel like you're being watched and you behave differently.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah. Like studies have shown people become more ethical, even if they know like it's not like a real surveillance kind of thing, but just seeing an image of an eye as if it's looking out at you. Like they do those old studies of like, okay, will the kid swipe the candy if it's in front of the poster that has the eye and stuff?
Yes. Oh, that's so funny. Like, as you were saying that, like, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. But I had this like weird epiphany though, because so the two versions of "Don't Be a Jerk," the one that I was first looking at is the one with like that crowd with all these people that almost becomes like abstracted, you know, texture. Yeah. And then this one is just that close up to the eye. So I was just thinking about like the whole like "Don't be a jerk" like as a societal thing versus "Don't be a jerk" with just the one eyeball is like just this very personal like inner thing. But it was interesting because then you pointed out like the the outside yourself effect of like someone else looking at you, where I look at it as like it's the viewer's eye and you're supposed to look within yourself to not be a jerk. So that's interesting how like it can go both ways. I'm like, oh man.
Oh, I see what you're saying about the outside inside. You know, are you more concerned about other people's judgments or your own judgment of yourself? And I guess that's one of those things where, as straightforward as her artwork so often is, like she literally spells it out for you, there's still room for interpretation. There's still,
are you telling other people not to be a jerk, or should you really be telling yourself?
Yeah, and there's still some ambiguity there. In a way that, like I say, it continues to be relevant. 2017, so now 20 years later, 21 years later, and after that, she was printing it on skateboard decks. Just big "Don't be a jerk" on the bottom of skateboard decks.
I'm going on eBay. What do those go for? I need one.
I don't know, but
I need a skateboard deck that says "Don't be a jerk."
I know. I don't know that I can get the Barbara Kruger original, but I mean,
no, I don't. Reproduction's fine.
Unless she goes like, I'd be curious. Now I want to look it up. Because I wonder if she goes like a Keith Haring Pop Shop kind of like, this is for the masses, you know?
Yeah.
But it is an interesting piece. And I do want to sort of in wrapping it up, because I think we're probably getting around that time. My final segment, I always just kind of try to wrap it up with talking about like different purposes of art. And I'm wrapping it up. I want just a 3-point rating scale. And where should this hang? The Louvre? Is this something to look at? The lab? Is this something to learn from? Or the Louvre? British for the bathroom. There's a poop joke in there somewhere.
Oh, that's terrible.
That's interesting. Okay, so I think based on your original metrics, I would probably say lab, because I do think that it needs to be studied. It's not like just a pretty thing you'd hang above your couch, which is kind of how I would like with the Louvre. You know, I'd be like impressionist landscapes, you know, which we could have a whole other conversation about why Jenny doesn't like those. But
I would love to have that conversation. We could be here. We could be here for days.
It's scandalous because we're from Chicago, where they all exist. But I think that in the lab, because I feel like this almost like it needs to be on like a billboard right now. Like it needs to be out there for all of society. Like it needs the most exposure possible. I feel like it's more of a what's the word I'm looking for? Not political activism, but social. There's social relevance and stuff to it that I think that needs to be. Yeah.
Well,
I think it would easily stand out now. It looks just as modern as ever.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think what I find really interesting about it, and I would also put it in the lab. I got to say, as much as I like this piece, and the more I study Barbara Kruger and the more I've heard from her, the more I like, you know, she seems like a really cool person with a lot of ideals that I can be on board with. And I definitely appreciate that. Aesthetically, I got to be honest, I never really liked her work. I honestly didn't look into her much until you mentioned her, because I always looked at her work and it was just like, oh, I don't like collages. This is like just a paste up. This is text on a found image. And
nice.
Like, you know, like it's just stylistically, it's not what I make. It's not what I'm drawn to. And, you know, I don't mean that in a way that's dismissive, but like,
I think that's the case for a lot of people. I would say that if we did an overall average, most people I think would feel that way. Yeah. Agreed.
But it is one of those things that like the ideas behind it, I find really interesting. And, you know, the way that she has developed her craft, I think what's most interesting to me is so much of her work is treading this like ultra fine line where you talked about how it's something for today. It would resonate today. It would resonate like it's well over 30 years old and it would still resonate, which in some ways is kind of sad that we still need this lesson decades later, you know?
Yeah.
But at the same time, what I think about is her work is political, very much so. And at the same time, with a piece like this, it doesn't matter what your politics are. You can kind of get behind it. You know what I mean?
It's not necessarily polarizing
it's not,
in the traditional sense.
Yes, it is not polarizing. Like, you know, so much stuff that is political art. People on the left love it or people on the right love it, but they don't agree on it. Whereas this is a message that left, right, or center, I think we can all agree. Don't be a jerk.
I would hope so.
I would hope so. I would hope so.
You would hope.
You know,
you would hope.
But yeah, I think that's a good. Let's end it with a message of hope. I think that seems like a good spot to end on. So
as we are talking in on the eve of the big election, yes, let's end this with hope.
So thank you for not being a jerk and taking time to help me out. I really appreciate your taking the time to meet with me, and it was wonderful talking to you. Thank you.
No problem. This was really fun, actually.
This concludes this week's episode of Who Arted. If you found this tolerable, please like and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. You can find images of the work being discussed this week and every week in the show notes, on Twitter @WoodArtEd, and the website whoartedpodcast.com. Podcast done.